All right, it's Dr. Collins with the Advanced Orthogonal Institute, and today we're doing the horizontal film. I also am including some PowerPoint slides from our seminars, just so you can get a little more technical detail, which I'll pull up here in a minute. But by way of shameless plug, you know what time it is. Boot camp, June 24th through 28th. You should sign up if you are not signed up already. And after that, we got an annual conference brewing, which is stacked. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about the horizontal film. This is going to be your primary film. When we're talking about rotation, right? How is the atlas rotated relative to the skull? That Y vector. This film is going to give you that information, and it's going to play heavily into the rotational setting on your instrument. And just by way of introduction with these slides, I thought these were really helpful. You're going to be looking up, basically, you're making two lines on this film, but there's a lot of nuance here. One, we are getting the horizontal cephalic line, right, which on your software that's going to show up as the VSL, and then you'll see VAL, and that's going to be that atlas horizontal plane line. So those two are going to create ultimately, what we're going to measure. Let me get you down here so you guys can see, and then we'll go back. That's what we're trying to do here. We are trying to generate our rotational component of our listing. All right. So let's talk about the atlas first. So very similar to the frontal film, when we're measuring the atlas frontal plane, you're going to remember majority rules, okay? I'm going to have to do these animations every time. Okay, so we're going to reference, basically there's four lines in majority rules, meaning we're going to pick, if there's one that doesn't match up, we're going to scrap that and go with the lines that are basically superimposed, and that's going to be our atlas plane on this horizontal film. And if we have 2 and 2, from my understanding, we're going with that transverse framing. But these are your different references that you're going to draw lines. So you want to be at the top, that superior anterior portion of that mass. Then you're going to see the posterior superior. These are the ones in yellow. Posterior superior portion of that mass. That red line is going to be going through the transverse foramen, which most of us are used to. And then you'll see finally in blue, neural canal. That neural canal is going to be, here we go. That neural canal, so in blue, you're going to see basically a perpendicular line to if you drop a line through the posterior tubercle and anterior tubercle. So just to give you a little bit of a frame of reference before I get into these. Now, also worth mentioning is how do you, right? Like I can say that, but how do you measure those, right? Like how do you determine where anterior superior mass is, posterior superior mass, right? Transverse frame, and that's pretty straightforward. Well, I'll show you this other slide, which I thought was incredibly valuable. You got to remember when we're taking the horizontal film, vertex film, you're at an angle. Your tube and Bucky are set up at an angle relative to their head. So something interesting happens is you're actually going to see the inferior facets are going to be just anterior to the superior facets. If that doesn't make sense looking at this, just take my word for it. But your superior facets are going to sit just kind of behind, just kind of underneath, right? So when I go to my film, so you can see what I'm talking about, normally I do the cephalic line, horizontal cephalic line first, but just, because we're in it. when we're looking at this atlas, where are the superior and inferior, right? Well, I'll kind of draw here, but you'll notice those inferior facets will be typically a little rounder and then fuller medially. All right. Okay. And then for that superior mass, it's actually going to be just underneath. I think you'll see this, right? And it can even go a little further lateral before kind of intersecting there. And same thing underneath on the other side. It'll be a little bit south. All right. So inferiors, inferior, inferior, facet, and superior, superior. Okay, so transverse foramen, just marking these out for you guys. This one's pretty straightforward for most of us. We're used to these guys. All right. And then that anterior and posterior tubercle. What am I talking about? So you'll notice up top here and kind of down south. It's that posterior tubercle. All right, so that's going to give me references to be able to drop some lines. And again, majority rules. So normally my films are not this cluttered. I'm dropping tools and just kind of looking visually. But if we start with the transverse foramen, I'm in the middle of both of those. We can start kind of scrolling up and down and seeing if anybody stands out wildly. And then in terms of the neural canal measurement, might be a little bit off on my drawing there. To me, this is the least reliable one of these lines. But I feel good about that. I feel like we're right at that point. Right at that point there. Okay. So, transverse foramen, north and south. We've got those superior masses. Might be off a little bit on this superior aspect of how I drew that. Just kind of dial it in a little bit. And within the technique, you know, when we're learning it, again, you're going through each one of these lines just to show you. Boom, boom, boom. Neural canal, right? So you've got all of those lines that you're actually drawing, but just in terms of workflow. But you get the idea. I won't hammer this to death. Now, moving on, just to clean this up a bit here. And again, let's say you had one of those lines that just is not adding up. You scrap that and you go with majority rules. You go with the other three. So let's do that horizontal cephalic line, which is typically what I start off with. So you're going to see it's listed as VSL. With this tool, you're going to notice that you got that entire oval shape, and this is what can get you in trouble, and it's one of the things that makes AdvO, I think, unique, is they're focusing on the zone up top here because that entire skull truly can be unreliable. In the late 90s, they really dialed in focusing on that anterior portion. And then these two windows that are going to be, let's kind of circle them here. These two windows, this one here, right? And this one here. And I'll go back to the slide because this is looking a little bit crazy. But the idea being that these three windows collectively will give you the most consistent sense of the skull. All right, so if you look here, you'll have that frontal bone, right? And then these two windows back here. And the idea is you want to have the same space. And if you have to pick, right, if the skull is just not looking, if it's not making sense, you're going with the more lateral margin that you want it to be lined up. Meaning, you get what I mean. And then moving more medially in terms of spacing. So you want the spacing to make the most sense on the sides more than the medial. Okay. And then you want that space to be space to bone very similar in those two windows to each other, right? Okay. So that's where I would drop on this particular patient a horizontal cephalic line. Again, with those three windows. When you start splitting hairs, it's time. But that's going to be your two lines that you're pulling your rotational measurement off of. And then that cal V will give you what you'll drag into your frontal film to make up your final analysis. So I hope that was helpful. I hope the slides helped because that's a little bit difficult to explain sometimes, those masses. But again, by way of shameless plug, I would love for you guys to join us for the next annual conference and especially boot camp. Boot camp's coming up in June. You can register at the bottom of the page and we'd love to see you there. You're going to have a whole group of guys who are really trying to get you sharp at what you do. And we're going to be at some different offices. It's not just going to be at the Pierce Clinic this year. We're actually going to be hitting up a few different offices in that St. Pete area. So you can be in some different spaces, see some different offices, and see how they're practicing advanced orthogonal. But hey, I hope this was helpful for you. Drop a comment, hit a like, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a great day.